Calaroga Shark Media.
Hello, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. Deadline did a lengthy interview with John Mulaney. John started talking about how his friends and family confronting him with addiction evolved into being in his stand-up. After coming out of detox, Mulaney reached out to friend/comedian Joe Mandy to kind of get a handle on what had happened there. Mandy said it was extremely funny that I was giving notes on each person's letter after they read it, and I told him after the intervention how I ranked the speeches. He helped me see how the dynamic was funny right away. John said, I've always been very personal, and I understand that the subject matter is, for lack of a better term, darker or more intimate, but my approach to it felt similar to the rest of my specials, honestly, so I haven't found it more difficult to talk about. Good question by Deadline, who said, you called it a wide-ranging conversation. Was that meant to be code for this might not be what everyone expects? Mulaney said, that was a callback to the GQ article that I ended the special with, which says, we spoke with the comedian in a wide-ranging conversation. I found it really funny that my drug-addled self had been so sweeping in that interview, and I also just thought it was a funny turn of phrase. I thought it'd be a good subtitle for the special, and then I thought it's not that wide-ranging of a conversation. It's pretty much about one topic. Deadline asked, when you were sitting through the intervention, did you have an aha moment about how it could be a great stand-up someday? John said, no, I wish I had a more wily mind, but no, it's just a bad moment. And I'm someone who, through every single thing that's ever happened in my life, have known it to be funny somehow. It was more the chemical hell that took that away. I was quite under the influence when I arrived. I was both high and unable to keep using because they wouldn't let me go to the bathroom, so I was in a very agitated state. Did you ask your friends about mentioning them in the special before you did it? Mulaney said, I cleared it by performing it and then asking, hey, was that okay? A friend of mine said, how come when you tell the story, you're cool and we're all lame? And they were right. And I said, I'm telling it from that little bastard's perspective when I was the coolest guy in New York City that night and you guys were completely bringing me down. A lot of people watched Mike Birbiglia over the weekend, getting good reviews for that one. His special's on Netflix. The Daily Beast asked him about Hasan Minhaj. Birbig said, my feeling is I love Hasan. I love his comedy. He's a friend. I thought his video response was tremendously well done. That's sort of just my feeling about it. I think he explained it really well. Good follow-up. Did it make you think about your own work in terms of how you deal with those issues? Like, do I bend the truth here or do I exaggerate? Birbig said, with my own shows, I always think in relation to when I'm telling a story, would I feel comfortable telling the same story to the people who were there? So every now and then, I'll have something where I'm like, I have to get this right. For example, I talk on my show about having type 2 diabetes and reversing my type 2 diabetes. And for me, I was like, oh, I got to make sure that's true. Because what if someone saw the show and they were like, I'm going to reverse my type 2 diabetes like Mike? And then they can't. It's impossible. So every now and then I have something like that where I'll think about it. And of course, I have these outlandish things that have occurred in my life, like jumping through a second-story window sleepwalking. And that's another thing where I'm like, I don't want to mislead people with my medical issues. But then there's this other side of me, which is I'm in some ways like an Irish storyteller, where every time you tell a story, it gets a little longer. And I think memory works like that too. I think the more you tell a story, the more you remember things. And sometimes I look back and go, maybe it wasn't like that. When I do a joke on stage, if it gets a big laugh, then that tells me something about what people experienced. If they gasp, that tells me something about what people experienced. If someone complains to me after a show, if they come up and they're like, hey, that hurt my feelings, that affects the way I feel about it. I remember years ago, I used to workshop a ton of my material at Union Hall, and someone came up to me after the show and said, hey, I don't like how you said this. And I thought about it. And the other one was an email. Someone wrote to me and said, you tell this one joke, and I don't think I'll ever come to one of your shows again. And I wrote back, here's the reasoning for the joke, and here's the thought process. And I might do the joke again, I might not, but I totally hear what your point is. And the person wrote back like, okay, I'll return to your shows. So a lot of comedians aren't interested in what the audience has to say. I'm actually very interested because ultimately the shows are about the audience. It's my stories. It's things I've observed, but really it's about what do we all have in common. Steve Treviño was in San Antonio over the weekend taping his new special, My San Antonio Caught Up With Him. They describe Treviño as the South Texas version of Henny Youngman and point out that Treviño's wife, Renee, has become a major part of his last 4 specials titled Relatable, Till Death, My Life in Quarantine, and I Speak Wife. In the latter, he jokes about how much work he puts into translating his wife's complicated words into achievable goals. Steve said, I believe me and my wife have true love. Do we get on each other's nerves? Absolutely. But when we argue, divorce is never part of the discussion. We have this attitude that we're going to make it work. We're going to do this together. They do a podcast together where they discuss life, marriage, and parenting their 8-year-old son and 3-year-old daughter. It is called Steve Treviño and Captain Evil, the podcast. Renee's nickname Captain Evil started as an inside joke because she's so above average and so beautiful that she can't just be evil. She has to be a captain of evil. It turned into a whole thing. Now we have merchandise and other women are referring to themselves as Captain Evil. Men will show me that they have their wife saved in their phone as Captain Evil. You never know what's going to go viral. He picked San Antonio to record. He said, you're either a San Antonio guy or an Austin guy, and I'm a San Antonio guy for sure. I love Austin, but please don't tell me their tacos are better than San Antonio. If the name Steve Treviño is ringing a bell, My San Antonio reminds us, he was on the George Lopez podcast when the whole Ralph Barbosa thing happened. As My San Antonio says, George got a little, quote, grouchy when Barbosa's name came up. Steve said, if I'm being completely honest with you, it was heartbreaking on all sides. I didn't expect it to end up the way it ended up. I want everybody to succeed. I want no more crabs in a bucket. I wish nothing but the best for Ralph Barbosa, and I wish nothing but the best for George Lopez. I was thinking of you guys this morning. I was at the National Donut chain getting my coffee, as I tend to do, and Evil Bill Engvall was there, and Evil Bill Engvall has shaved off his goatee, so now he's just the Bill Engvall guy. I will keep you posted. Tiffany Haddish was arrested for DUI Friday morning. A watch commander for the Beverly Hills PD said, we responded to a call of a vehicle on the roadway at 5:45 this morning. The driver was asleep behind the wheel. According to reports, Haddish's car was stopped in lanes of traffic and had not pulled over to the side. The watch commander notes there were no traffic collisions. A spokesperson said the investigation led us to arrest her for a DUI. TMZ somehow came up with a video. Haddish appears cooperative when the police put her in handcuffs and walked her to the back of their vehicle. Friday night, Tiffany got on stage at the Laugh Factory. An audience member asked what happened last night, and Haddish joked, "You tell me. I had prayed to God to send me a man with a job, a career, preferably in a uniform, and he answered my prayers." There's nothing funny about a DUI, but in terms of just a joke and having something armed to come back with, that was pretty good. Netflix has released a clip from Ricky Gervais's Armageddon. That'll be out on Christmas Day. I went to pull the clip, and the clip they shared, it's funny, but it takes Ricky about 1:15 to set up the joke, so I didn't want to bog down this podcast in that. The gist of the joke is Ricky talking about evolution and said, I've noticed one thing about the slug and the snail. Let's not split hairs. Let's be honest. The snail is basically a slug with a shell on it, isn't it? Right? But if you pull the shell off the snail, it starts going, oh, I'm dying. And the slug is like, welcome to the real world. Ricky tells it much better, but I told it in about 8 seconds as opposed to a minute and a half. You can watch Armageddon on Christmas Day. T.I., remember he was getting into comedy? Baller alert, your home for comedy news, says T.I. lost some money in his comedy endeavor. T.I. said, chase the money, not the women. I learned something else. After that, I learned to chase the dream, not the money. He was asked if he declines financial opportunities that don't match his goals. He says, I do it every time I choose to do comedy instead of go and do music. And I was on LinkedIn. I'm always looking for some extra cash and saw that Heartbeat, Kevin Hart's company, has posted a job. From the LinkedIn posting, welcome to Heartbeat. We are comedy, we are culture. Founded by Kevin Hart, Heartbeat is the global multi-platform media company creating entertainment at the intersection of comedy and culture with a mission to keep the world laughing together. Goes on to describe Heartbeat. All right, what are they looking for? Head of live and experiential. A visionary leader who will play a crucial role in shaping and executing our live event strategies by producing world-class industry and consumer-facing events. The position will be involved with all aspects of event production from ideation through execution, including sponsorship, content strategy, logistics, talent relations, public relations, P&L management, business development, and client servicing. Some of the responsibilities: negotiate hotel and venue deals, proactively meet with the top comedic and music live entertainment providers, including agents, managers, promoters, event producers, agencies, and more, to source leads and further cultivate industry relationships. Cultivate relationships with touring comedians, music acts, and entertainers to have a staple of talent to feature in Heartbeat festivals, tours, and live events. Although events is spelled EVENEST. Experience and skills. High EQ. You are intuitive and can easily work with and for diverse people with different capabilities and needs, whether they're colleagues, talent, or audience members. Love for live performance, comedy, music, and art. Ability to work nights and weekends when needed. And the job posting says, look, it's called work for a reason. We show up for our teammates, our partners, and our audience. We are a high-energy culture where everyone is a headliner. That's in caps. Expected to give their best performance, but that doesn't mean it can't be fun, meaningful, and inspiring, because if you're not having fun at work, you're missing a good time. So if you hate fun, never like to laugh, and hardly ever smile, we have the job for you somewhere else. Ooh, zing. Compensation range, $200,000 to $300,000. Not bad, huh? And that is your comedy news for today. You can follow this show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Overcast, Pocket Casts. Brain's a little slow pulling up that list today, huh? All right, see you tomorrow.